In September of 1962, in the city of Westminster, London, a man named Jeff Emmerich began his first day as an assistant engineer at Electric and Musical Industries at 3 Abbey Road. Jeff was assigned to be an assistant engineer to a man named Norman Smith. Norman was working with an up-and-coming Liverpool band called the Beatles. Now, Jeff was in a lucky position, having worked as an assistant engineer for most of the Beatles' early discography, until eventually landing the role as the lead engineer on the Beatles' Revolver. And then Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the White Album, and Abbey Road. And when he started working on Revolver, he was only 20 years old. The techniques that Jeff pioneered are so much more than just methods to get the sound of the Beatles. To understand the methods of Jeff Emmerich is essentially to understand the birth of modern music production. In the same way that the Beatles kind of defined what pop music meant during the 20th century, their productions did the same. They defined what it meant to record popular music. And in doing that, they kind of like pissed off a bunch of people. They broke all the rules. And then eventually, those rules got redefined. If you can understand the methods of Revolver, every single time you place a microphone on a kick drum, every time you set up a compressor, every time you EQ a master track, you will understand the cultural context behind why you're making those decisions. This is kind of ground zero. This is where it all began. So, here's what we're gonna do. This is Roan Zen Martin. He is unapologetically Gen Z's biggest Beatles fan. He has written an entire track to be recorded and produced in the style of the Beatles' Revolver. We're gonna use all the information we gather on microphone position, on mixing, on equipment, on mastering, all the historical context, and we're gonna apply it to a modern production. Now, before going any further, by far, the biggest source for this video is Jeff Emmerich's Here, There, and Everywhere. If you're an audio engineer, you gotta read this book. It's like saying you're a sci-fi fan and you haven't seen Star Wars. You just check it out. And by the way, this is a series called From the Scene. From the Scene can be any topic under the sun. The string that ties all these videos together is that I'm producing music from a subscriber. You can be on this video series. You can use the form down below to apply. So go check it out. So our story starts on April 6th, 1966. It's Jeff Emmerich's first day as the lead engineer, and they're working on a song called Tomorrow Never Knows. I hope this doesn't come across as disrespectful. I told myself I would make cool, fun animations, and this was the best I could do. That's Patrick. And Jeff,
this needs to stop now,
has gotten himself into a little hot water. See, studios in the 60s were not how they are today. Look at these engineers. Look at them in their lab coats and their prim and proper outfits and demeanors. This is the era before music and informality. Before audio engineers looked like this, or this, or this. Back then, they looked like this. Formality was in, and so were rules. EMI kind of felt like they had the whole music recording thing figured out. There were standard measurements, standard placements for each microphone, where to exactly place the microphone on a guitar, on strings, on a kick. These placements helped get an accurate sound from each of these instruments. These placements helped keep fragile ribbon and condenser microphones from being damaged. Music production was not an art, it was a formula. Now, this video is sponsored by Austrian Audio. If you know me at all, you know that I think that these are some of the best microphones on the market, period. We will use the OC818 and the OC-S10 all over this production, on lead vocals, lead guitar, on the keys. They will speak for themselves. There's not enough amazing things that I can say about the OC818 in particular. This microphone has been a standard in almost every production I've made since I got it several years ago. It is exquisite. Let's look at how a drum kit was supposed to be recorded back then. This is how EMI used to record drums. A kick mic, usually an STC 4033, about 2 feet away from the kick, and then another microphone, an SDC 4038, known today as a Coles 4038, about 5 feet up at the center. This setup was designed to give kind of an honest interpretation of the drums. It was mono, and it was fairly roomy. And this is just kind of how things were back in the day, even on the early Beatles records made by Norman Smith. It sounds a little bit like this. And I am not a drummer. I am so sorry for what you're about to hear. Now back to our boy Jeff. Jeff takes that kick mic and he moves it from 2 feet away to 3 inches away. And the Beatles loved it. And there's kind of a specific reason why they loved it. For that, we need to turn our attention to Paul McCartney, who by this time was obsessed with the records coming out of Motown. He loved the mixes that he heard out of a studio called Hitsville, USA. Now, Hitsville, USA was a retrofitted studio within a house. That room was 15 feet by 28 feet. The records were tight and punchy and warm. I mean, compare the size of Hitsville, USA to a room like Studio 2 in Abbey Road. Hitsville, USA had popularized the use of DI boxes for bass guitar. Combine that with a room that has a very short, minimal reverb and some pretty advanced music production methods for the time, and you get a mix that has really prominent low end. Paul wanted to see that more on Beatles records. And by the way, these Motown records were just crushing in the charts. The Funk Brothers band had more #1 hits than the Beatles, Elvis, the Stones, and the Beach Boys combined. I mean, we're talking Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, the Jackson 5. I'll put more up on screen. It could just keep going. Paul, being just as much a cunning businessman as he is an amazing musician, might have saw this and wanted to compete. Now, whenever it comes to the music tech front, Hitsville, USA had a lot going on to get this iconic sound. There was some pretty high-tech stuff going on in the control room for the time. Equipment from Poltech, Langevin, a custom-built 8-track machine, and a custom-built mastering EQ. Motown was one of the most prominent users of overdubs at the time. Having an 8-track machine meant that they had more flexibility and more firepower to add more orchestration to their tracks. And they also had this cutting-edge compressor called a Fairchild 660. Now, the Beatles were so into the Motown sound that the original idea was to record the record in the USA. The USA had more premium, more expensive equipment. They were looking at Stax Studios in Memphis, Atlantic Studios in New York, or literally Hitsville, USA in Detroit. But after some worries about safety and security from enthusiastic fans, which is insane, they eventually ended up going back to EMI or Abbey Road. This explains why Jeff did what he did, why he broke the rules that he broke, why he moved that kick mic closer to the kick drum. Jeff was doing what Paul wanted, and currently, with the limitations of the gear that Abbey Road had, he couldn't do it. In order to get the sounds coming out of the US, he had to work creatively with a more limited palette. Then Jeff does this. This is eventually where Jeff Emerick ended up. Now, of course, we have modern microphones. We don't have all the vintage Abbey Road mics, but these are all the same positions. Here we have an OC818 filling in for what would normally be a Coles 4038 or an AKG D19. On the now iconic close kick mic, we have another OC818, some form of dynamic microphones. They had D19s on rack tom bottom and floor tom top. We have the back of the hi-hat mic at kind of an oblique angle with another dynamic. This one is a 421. Small diaphragm condenser. They had a Neumann on snare bottom with nothing on snare top. That sounds a little bit like this. So this difference in tone is primarily due to something called the proximity effect. Now, even if you don't know that term, you kind of know it subconsciously. As you get closer to a microphone, you increase the bass response. This is why, like in voiceovers on movie trailers, voices sound huge. Now, to classically trained engineers at EMI, this approach was incorrect because the rack tom doesn't sound like a rack tom to my ears. My ears are 2 feet away, the microphone is inches away. It was a more exaggerated, bass-heavy interpretation of the reality. And that is the concept. If you walk away with nothing else from this video, walk away with this. The production philosophy behind the Beatles' Revolver was one of the first times in popular music where recording engineers creatively augmented what they heard rather than simply documenting it. You can thank the Beatles and you can thank Motown for transforming music production from a science into a creative art form. Now, when Geoff Emerick moved that kick drum closer, he kind of set off a chain reaction. He had broken the rules, and the Beatles liked it. That gave him permission to do some pretty crazy things. Tomorrow Never Knows is this kind of creative explosion of avant-garde music showing up in a pop record. Rather than a typical chord progression, the song relies on a drone played on a sitar, which we know is influenced, of course, by George Harrison's love of Indian music. The band experimented with reversing tape. They created experimental musical interludes that were heavily influenced by LSD. They pulled from experimental music like Musique Concrete, creating musical collages by essentially live sampling tape loops. Several tape loops were fed into the 4 channels on the console, and then the Beatles would shout when to raise and lower each of the tape loops. This effectively created one of the first uses of a synthesizer or a sampler in popular music. They sped up tape of Paul McCartney laughing to sound like seagulls. A new technique called ADT, or automatic double tracking, was developed to give the illusion of a doubled vocal, when in reality it was a duplicate vocal sent to another tape reel. That tape reel then had an oscillator that was moved on it. This slightly changed the pitch and the timing of that duplicate, creating the effect of a looser vocal under the original. That technique was actually developed by engineer Ken Townsend, and it sounds a bit like this.
Just as I'm convinced I know, just as I was getting closure, you wanna come along and tell me now.
Perhaps most iconically, John Lennon wanted his voice to sound like the Dalai Lama shouting from a mountaintop. The result is Geoff running the vocal through a rotary speaker. This got a very distant, wispy, oscillating vocal tone. All this to say that Geoff essentially broke every single rule that EMI had written down about how to record a record. And EMI just kind of had to sit there and let him do it. Eventually, they gave him express written permission to break these rules because it was the Beatles, the biggest band in the world. So for the gear nerds out there, why don't we list some of the gear that Geoff was working with? The newly designed drum setup that we mentioned earlier would famously be sent through the Fairchild 660. Though initially used for vocals on some earlier Beatles records like A Hard Day's Night, Revolver famously started using this compressor on the drums and the guitar. Now that bass tone was also recorded with one of the very first instances of something called a sub-kick microphone. Without getting into the technical details, a speaker and a microphone are kind of the same thing. And if you were to, for example, wire a speaker as an input rather than an output, it's kind of a microphone. By rewiring an extra PA speaker to work as a microphone and then putting that on Paul's bass, picked up a lot more sub information, more low end. Now, another compressor that was frequently used on the Beatles was the Altec RS-124. This was a modified Altec designed specifically for EMI. Now, using the RS-124 and the Fairchild 660, it wasn't uncommon for these productions to have just a ridiculous amount of compression. The rhythm tracks would be run through both of these compressors, with the Altec frequently being used for tracking, mixing, and mastering, meaning that original source sound could be run through a compressor 3 or 4 different times. The result is sometimes as much as 20 decibels of reduction on things like the bass and the drums. I'm going to chime in from the edit bay here because I think I probably breezed by this point a little bit too fast. This is pretty insane. It would be insane now, and it was absolutely insane in 1966. A compressor works by making the louder parts of the audio signal closer in volume to the quieter parts, and then scaling all of that up uniformly. Or in layman's terms, making everything that feels far away all of a sudden feel much more upfront than it did before compression. You don't have to be an audio engineer to hear this concept. Go listen to any production, any rock, any pop production specifically, and you'll start to hear how all these different instruments can feel very forward and very in your face. That is compression. That's the reason why waveforms start out looking like this, and then by the end of the mix, they look like this. And In other words, this is kind of the other half of the whole microphone position story. Exaggerate what you hear on the incoming signal with the microphone, and then reinforce and exaggerate it further through heavy compression. If you take away anything from this section, don't let it be the gear that they use. Let it be this concept, because this is just as key as changing the position of that kick microphone. There was a specific EQ used for Neumann microphones at the time called an RS-92 that was supposedly used for getting some of the top end out of Neumanns. Another Neumann invention was the RS Presence Box, which was used to do the opposite. Now, the Beatles famously recorded on a Red 51 console. This console had some pretty intense limitations. Not only was there only 4 different tracks, both of them only had a bass and a treble control. And in order to get around some of these tonal limitations, Jeff would often overload these preamps to create vocal distortion or distortion on any signal on the way in. But on the mastering side of this, things got a little bit more complicated. The RS-56 UTC equalizer, or affectionately known as the curve bender, was one of the earliest examples of a parametric EQ. Parametric EQ is exactly what you are probably used to. Definitely wasn't what they were used to at the time. It essentially just means an EQ where you can select the exact frequency that you want to change, as opposed to a really basic EQ that just has a bass or treble knob, for example. On the mastering side, ATOC, or automatic transient overload control, was used to add even more low end by essentially limiting the mix, so you could boost more volume without ever distorting the signal. Now, there was one big limitation that the Beatles had to deal with that others didn't, and that's the use of a 4-track recorder. Most people had upgraded to an 8-track by this point, but the Beatles and Abbey Road, which was always a little bit hesitant to introduce new technologies, they were working on a Studer J37. Now, this pretty severely limited the amount of overdubs they could do without kind of severe generation loss, meaning every time that you transfer a recording to a different tape, you lose some fidelity in the same way that you might upload and download a picture 1,000 times. And although some of the overdub diagrams are somewhat simple, others got incredibly complicated given the orchestrations that the Beatles were making. I found these examples from Sgt. Pepper's. This is how you take this to the extreme. This is Penny Lane, and this is Strawberry Fields. Shout out to this user on Reddit who made all of these, which is insane. Now, the generation loss and the distortion that came from that, combined with some pretty heavy use of compression to bring out the low end, that kind of created this very trademark sound for the record. You got tracks that had plenty of distortion and loudness, unapologetically a lot of distortion, which kind of, in some ways, introduced this proto-loudness wars of the 60s to help these tracks compete on car radio systems. Shout out to Phil Spector for taking that to the absolute extreme. Okay, do you kind of see what I'm getting at here? The songwriting vision of the Beatles at the time kind of necessitated a change in how people approached record production. The vision of the audio engineer in a lab coat was kind of archaic, although EMI still made them wear it. Look at Glenn Johns though. This man just is trying to be as dapper as possible. Music production was becoming part of the songwriting process. More and more records started to abstract from reality. This was all done through microphone placement and sampling and experimentations with phase and timing and using gear improperly, like distorting tube preamps on purpose. All of this was not the way things were supposed to be. And from this lens, you can kind of start to see why parents of the 60s thought the Beatles were like the devil. This was the envelope being pushed, and although it feels normal to us now, it was anything but at the time. So with that in mind, and all this information, the technical and the historical context, what happens if we apply these methods and kind of put them in a modern context? I want to translate these methods to something that you guys all have at home. So all the research for this video, the recording of the track, all the production happened starting back in November of last year. The track Tell Me Nothing by Roan Zen Martin is done now. As we start to build this track from the bottom up, remember that you can go listen to it on Spotify here. He also has a killer YouTube channel. You might have seen this video pop up in your feed. Let's go all support him. I really think he's part of the next generation of music production YouTube. Now, I want to say right off the bat, the point of this video is not really to glorify the equipment of the Beatles. It's also not to directly emulate a one-to-one sound. If you're familiar with my work and track recreations and trying to make a cover that's as accurate as possible, that's not what this video is. What we're trying to do is take the essence, the DNA of the Beatles' Revolver and show how you can apply it to your own tracks. If you walk away from this video thinking you need to buy an RS-124 hardware unit or that a Fairchild 660 is worth $20,000, then I've kind of failed you. It's not what I'm trying to say. If you walk away with a greater understanding of the historical context behind why we mic and record things the way that we do, then I would be very happy. This entire instrumental performance was done live. The only overdubs are the vocals, which I think is pretty cool. It's a similarly sized room to Hitsville, USA. It's a live performance much like they would have done. All the instrumentals don't use any artificial reverb. Any reverb that you hear on the drums is coming from the bleed from the guitars or the keyboard, what have you. Our file will be organized into 4 subgroups in order to try and reinterpret a 4-track recording into the digital world. Track 1 is kind of the key to everything. Track 1 is the drums and the bass. This is the track that gets all kinds of aggressive compression. Here is a sneak preview of how that track sounds. The next track contains both the guitars and the Rhodes keyboard. These are the more mid-ranged focused instruments, so they're all kind of grouped together. Here's how that track sounds. Track 3 are all the lead vocals, vocal doubles, and some of the accent harmonies. Sounds like this.
Oh, what could have been if you'd only let me in?
And track 4 are the choir vocals. There is a ton of choir overdubs of oohs and ahs and different harmonies. That sounds like this. From there, all of these go into a fairly heavily processed master chain to emulate the mastering process that you might hear at Abbey Road. That has a bunch of compression, mainly from an Altec RS-124 emulator, a lot of pretty aggressive tape distortion, and a lot of EQ from the Hitsville mastering EQ emulation from Universal Audio. When working in this style, I really tried my best to use broad stroke EQ decisions. Now, what does that mean? In essence, work with EQs that use knobs rather than that parametric line that we're used to. The main EQ that you'll see on this track is Ableton's EQ3. EQ3 has a bass, a mid, and a treble knob. Kind of thought of that as the best equivalent I had to the bass and treble knob on the Red 51s. Don't get too caught up in these exact plugins if you don't have them. Primarily focus on broad stroke EQs rather than surgical parametric EQs. And just, you use whatever analog emulator for a compressor you have available to you, and don't get too distracted with the UI design. Ableton's glue compressor is awesome, for example. So let's get back to our little 4-track layout. Starting with the most important of the 4 tracks, the rhythm. For the drums, we emulated the exact positions that Geoff Emerick used on Revolver. The only difference is I'm using more modern microphones and the microphones I have available in my studio. On the kick mic, we have the Loughton kick mic, a Loughton LA120 on snare bottom with nothing on snare top. We'll get back to that. 421s, one on the bottom of the rack tom and on the top of the floor tom, and another 421 on that sort of strange hi-hat position we see in this diagram. As our mono overhead, being the crazy Beatles fan that Roan is, he had an AKG D19 emulation mic. I'm not sure who made it, but we have that as our single mono overhead. Let's hear how all of that starts to stack up on top of each other. Now the drum sound is mostly mono as an homage to the Beatles, but it's not a fully mono track. Toms are actually gated, but they are stereo. So you'll hear them go stereo whenever we get a tom fill. But besides that, it's all mono, except for the hi-hat is a little bit off to the left. If I were to use T-towels and more dampening like Ringo was known for doing, gating the toms, I might not have needed to do that, but this did help clean up and tidy the drum sound a lot. Fairchild is absolutely decimating the kick and adding more compression to the entire drum group. The kick is most of the volume from this drum sound. Let me show you what it sounds like with and without all this compression. Now this is a really big drum sound and pretty Ringo-esque in my opinion, but I wanted a bit more cut from the kick. It's a bit round. So we did add a sample underneath it with all the low end cut out of it and just the clickiness of the kick sample kind of shaping the recorded kick. Now we also have the bass, a Hofner bass, which should be obvious. That was going through my Twinfinity UA tube preamp, and it was already clipping on the way in. We got it really aggressive and really thumpy right off the bat. Added another Fairchild emulation to crush the bass even further. And then in order to emulate that sub bass microphone that we talked about in part 1, I made a duplicate track with Ableton's bass roundup and just cut everything except for the bass to get more sub. Here's how that blends into the recorded DI bass. Now, both of these were then squashed with the RS-124 on the main track group. As a reminder, if you want to sit down with me and see me go through every single track in a lot more detail, that is over on Patreon. The mix breakdowns where you see me and my little head in the corner of the screen actually going through the file, all over on Patreon for $5 a month. And $8 a month gets you the mixed tracks that you can download for yourself and the raw tracks. I get this question on Patreon sometimes. The raw tracks are available for you right now in the description. You don't have to pay for that. It is my opinion that we should all sort of practice together and not have that be behind a price wall. And also, can we just all thank Roan for providing those? He did not have to do that. This is an original song. This is not a cover. So an artist letting you that far into their actual original production, it's really cool. All right, so the next track, Guitars and Keys. These are the tracks that are providing some stereo width to the performance, with one guitar on the left, the rhythm, and one guitar on the right, the lead. Both of these are just recorded with a single microphone, center of the speaker cone, dead simple. Sometimes adding a bunch of different microphones can just mess with phase relationships. The amps were, the rhythm was the Roland JC40, and the lead was my Fender Deluxe Reverb. So in this case, we had the OCS10 on the main lead guitar and the Lauten Clarion on the rhythm. The Rode is our mono signal kind of gluing this track together. It is a DI blended with two Austrian Audio OC818s. There's one on the center cone of each of the Suitcase Rhodes speakers. All of these are summed up together with, you guessed it, an RS-124 and a Fairchild 660. This time, more RS-124 than Fairchild. Let's hear how all this builds up on top of each other, and then we'll add in the prior track. I want you to notice how the drum sound changes from the bleed of these other instruments. Now the next track, the lead vocal track. All the leads were either done on the OCS10 or the OC818. The main lead vocal was all done on an OCS10, and much of the same processing. Broad strokes EQ decisions, RS-124. I'm kind of, repeating myself with some of these emulators. But we did start to experiment with some of these more kind of stranger Revolver techniques like ADT. At the very end of the song, we do have a rotary effect on the vocal. In fact, all of the vocal doubles have some form of ADT on them in order to thicken the doubles even further. So what would have originally sounded like two vocals on the left and right side sounds a bit more like four. Let's also hear that rotary sound in the outro.
No, she don't care. No, she don't care. And no sign showed ever since I met her, so I let go. Just let me forget her and turn the page. If I would've known your name.
Now the choir track, it's insane. Here is kind of the biggest part played by itself and then in context.
You don't tell me nothing. nothing.
That seems like an intimidating amount of tracks, but in reality, there isn't any processing happening to any of the individual tracks. It's all just group processing. RS-124. Fairchild 660. And really the only thing that's kind of distinct about this track is a lot of top-end. If you listen back to these Beatles records, you'll notice a pretty intense amount of treble, especially on the backing vocals. Have you ever listened to like your favorite guitar solo or your favorite vocal, your favorite bass alone, and it kind of doesn't make sense until you hear it in the context of the track? That is kind of might be what you experience here, because here are the tracks alone and then in the context of the mix.
You don't tell me nothing.
So that's our roundup of production. Remember, one more time, if you leave with nothing else, please leave with this. Remember that what we've discussed here is kind of the historical context and the birth of modern music production, at least in pop music. My hope is next time you go to mic, whatever it is, we'll use the kick drum as an example. Why are you putting the microphone that close? What are you aiming to get out of it? The reason Jeff did it is to get more low end, to make the record sound more like Motown. You know, a lot of what we're talking about today is fairly standard now, but as we know, in the 50s and the 60s, they weren't. Maybe one of you watching can see these things that were once revolutionary and are now the standard, and you can break them. You can do things that the revolutionaries from 70 years ago might get mad at now. Everyone was once the revolutionary, and many of us eventually become the traditionalist. So what are you gonna do to push this even farther? This is probably my favorite single take performance I've ever recorded. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is Tell Me Nothing, produced and recorded in the style of the Beatles' Revolver by Roan Zen Martin.
I had someone, she had me, and either way it couldn't be. So I'm disappearing, babe. So now that I need to break free, it'd really help if she'd agree. So what's this I'm hearing, babe? 'Cause she don't know, oh, I don't let her, you know I won't, oh, I know better, 'cause I ain't slow, I'm too clever to fool. And no signs showed ever since I met her, so I let go, just let me forget her, turn the page, if I would've known it, babe. Oh, what have you done? What could we have become? But you don't tell me nothing. You don't tell me nothing. Oh, what could have been? You could only let me in. But you don't tell me nothing. You don't tell me nothing. They told me not to hang around, that fantasy's gonna bring you down. Why don't you bring me down? And all that time we could have had, we moved on now, I'm so glad. No, I'm not mad. She had her chance, I tried to get her, but no romance seemed to happen ever, and I can't go if I can't ever leave. And no sign showed ever since I met her, so I let go, just let me forget her and turn the page, if I would've known it, babe. Oh, what have you done? What could we have become? But you don't tell me nothing. You don't tell me nothing. Oh, what could have been? We could
All right, guys, this was a beast. This was months of production, months of research. I haven't edited yet, but I'm sure it's weeks of editing. I hope you enjoyed. Yeah, that's it. See you in the next one. Bye-bye. Super quick, these videos are an insane lift. At the end of this video is an 80-track fully produced song alongside months and months of research, an insane amount of editing, and the culmination of so many different musicians' creative talents and efforts. If you like it, a like, a share, a subscribe, they really help these videos out. Thank you so much.